I played 28 games of Mech Rogue on my way to Legend to answer the question, is Mech Rogue really a tier 1 deck? And I've got to say, I learned a lot about this deck along the way. This list is the list that I played for all 28 of those games. And one thing that I would have to say right off the bat is do not sleep on the 1-drops. This is the perfect set of 1-drops for this deck. Click Clocker, just being able to drop a Divine Shield minion down on the board is really strong when you have a deck that can magnetize to it and make that minion bigger. Divine Shield, of course, really just preventing your opponents from being able to remove that minion or making it harder for them to do so. Drone Deconstructor being able to give us a scrap bot can be really powerful. And then, of course, the Frequency Oscillator here being able to give us the discount to use either this turn, it just gives us a free 2-1 in play, or to be able to bank that discount for a future turn. Gear Shift, actually a surprising card in the list. Oftentimes, you're going to have a very small hand size, and so when you play the Gear Shift, it's actually just draw 3. This actually works out to be really good draw for this particular rogue list. From the Scrap Heap, insane utility here, being able to get 3 scrap bots. Things like Poisonous can allow us to trade a very small minion into a much bigger opponent's minion. And then options like Stealth and Divine Shield make it significantly harder for our opponent to be able to remove our minions, and it plays perfectly into the game plan that we want to execute with this deck. The game plan that we want to execute with this deck is we want to have minions left over after our opponent's turn, and then we want to be able to make those minions bigger through magnetizations to the point that our opponent just can't remove them, and that we're able to push a significant amount of damage every single turn. Scrap bots go a long way to furthering that game plan. Inventomatic, again, dropping this on the board and having those cheap scrap bots, only 1 mana, to be able to magnetize, can really help you to grow some big minions quickly. This card can be good to put into play, magnetize to another minion to make that minion bigger, and then sometimes you're actually magnetizing to the Inventomatic itself to be able to make this minion as big as possible. Coppertail Snoop, don't underestimate getting a coin every time this card attacks, and if you can give this Wind Fury through a scrap bot, then potentially you're doing lots of damage and generating 2 extra coins every single time your minion attacks. Memoron the Mastermind proved to be a very interesting card choice in this deck, as well as the Voltron Prime. So what I found with these 2 legendary minions is they actually did not have that much of an impact on the 28 games that I played with the deck. Memoron, most of the time I was able to get it down, actually just intimidated the opponent. They overreacted to it. When I was able to get this card to stick, the extra value that it generated actually really didn't help me all that much. The 28 games that I played, not really all that impressive, and I would say not even a core card in the deck. Same note to the Voltron Prime, I would argue that it's not a core card in the deck. Really just not all that strong. Out of 28 games, the Voltron Prime really only had an effect in 2 games. I did win those 2 games, but I was likely going to be winning anyway. And quite honestly, I feel like you could potentially cut these cards. If you don't have the Memoron or the Voltron, I would recommend, again, just don't craft those and just plug in 2 copies of Security Automaton. It's cheap, it's going to hit the board, and it's going to get bigger every single time we play the mech. And quite honestly, the deck could actually be better if we cut Memoron and Voltron Prime and play the Security Automatons. Again, the legendaries really just not all that useful in the games that I played with the deck. Spider, though, actually proved to be a very interesting card for the deck. Allowing you to put a minion on the board that has stealth, even for only just that 1 turn, is really good. It's magnetic, so we can attach it to another minion, again, to just kind of hide it from our opponent, make it significantly harder for our opponent to be able to remove. And again, we just want to have minions left over so that we can continue to buff them turn after turn to push big damage and to be able to finish off our opponent. You can even just play this as a standalone card on the board so that it has stealth for 1 turn. Lab Constructor, this card just ends games. And I want you to keep in mind here, you don't always have to forge the Lab Constructor. Sometimes you can just play it out on the board and you can attach other magnetic mechs to it, like the scrap bots, just to be able to make it a little bit bigger and harder to remove. Stealth and Divine Shield are going to be perfect. Or you can attach it to an existing minion on the board. It's going to make it huge, and it's going to give you 2 copies of whatever this thing is. And those copies will also replicate themselves. It's insanely strong. And what I found is that once this Lab Constructor is out on the board, your opponent has exactly 1 turn. They have to remove both minions on the board that are going to replicate themselves. If they don't, you've most likely already won the game. They're just not going to be able to keep up with the amount of power that you're putting on the board and the copy that's going to be coming out of that big minion. Any Storm Coil, this card actually was never really dead in my hand when I had the mana to be able to play it. Likely, we're going to have a big minion on the board already, and then when we can get down to any Storm Coil, we get to make a copy of it. We give it Rush, Wind Fury, and Divine Shield. proved to be exceptionally strong with the big minions that we've been creating throughout the game. Definitely a good inclusion within the deck. And then, of course, for Ziliax, unity, precision, perfection speaks for itself. The only other note that I would have here about the list is I don't like the idea of playing Containment Unit in this list. I didn't actually try it, but when I think about my experience with the deck, I was winning the game anywhere from turn 3, that's right, turn 3, to about turn 7 on average. You really don't have time to play this card, and lists that are going to be running like a Scourge Illusionist to be able to draw and discount this, that game plan is actually just a little bit too slow, and I think that makes the deck worse, so that's why we're not actually running that in this version of the list. But what of the matchups? I was actually able to learn quite a bit about the matchups with this deck as well. Just taking a quick look here, you can see my stats with the deck. I came across at a grand total in 28 games, I was 21-7. And something interesting to note here, 12-1 when going first and 9-6 when going on the coin. This is a very initiative-based deck, so going first, definitely much, much better than going second. If you're going second, you're really going to have to take initiative from your opponent. You're either counting on them to have a very, very weak turn, or you're going to have to make an exceptionally strong play to really be able to get some minions to stick on the board so that we can continue to make those minions bigger through magnetization. Again, that's really just the main gameplay focus of this deck in order to be able to win games. Against Death Knight here, I was actually able to go 2-1. You can see the one loss was on the coin. The only Death Knight that I faced was, of course, Plague Death Knight. Lots of people still playing and experimenting with that deck. And what I found is that once you can start getting down big minions on the board, you magnetize smaller ones, make them bigger. And even if you can especially get a Lab Constructor down to start duplicating, really the Death Knight's only hope at that point is going to be a Chained Guardian, if they can remove both of your duplicating minions. If they can't, you really just go on to win the game. Keep in mind that the Death Knight, Plague Knight, is going to have access to Hardcore Cultist, that's going to deal 2 damage to your entire board. They have the Tomb Trader, that's going to deal 3 damage to the entire board. But if you can get to a minion with 4 health, and especially 5 health early in the game, they're really just not going to be able to remove it. Keeping in mind that Plague Death Knight does run Staff of the Primus, they can get to 4 damage with Staff of the Primus and Plague Strike or down with the ship. And they can potentially get to a 5 health minion if they're running Bone Breaker. Some of those decks are potentially running that. So really, Stealth and Divine Shield are very, very good friends. They're going to be able to protect our minions. And the Death Knight's really just going to struggle to remove those minions, and they take a ton of damage every single turn. I would call that matchup favored. Demon Hunter actually really scarce on the ladder right now. I have no insight into that matchup. 1-0 against Druid. Druid's still seeing a few different things. I believe this was actually against an aggro Druid. I haven't faced any of the ramp Druids with this particular deck. And I was really just able to overwhelm them. Our minions can get Divine Shield and theirs can't. That helps a lot. And then again, just being able to stealth minions. An aggro Druid doesn't have any way to remove those minions. And even a ramp Druid isn't going to be able to remove stealth minions and may struggle to remove Divine Shield minions. Again, I would say that this matchup is likely favored. We're just going to steamroll the Druid decks. Hunter, you can see here 3-0. I faced Arcane Hunter, I faced Secret Hunter, and I also faced a Big Beast Hunter. All 3 matchups really felt favored. My opponent was basically behind from the beginning of the game. You can see here I was actually able to win both games that I was going second. And I think, as best as I can remember, at least 2 and maybe even 3 games the Hunter played the turn 1 Costumed Singer, being able to draw secrets. The secrets really weren't impactful on the game whatsoever. And again, just the big minions were enough to be able to run over the Hunter. The only real removal that the Hunter's going to have access to is at turn 5 with Star Power, if they are able to draw that card. Of course, Arcane Hunter, they could potentially play like the Urchin Spines and Ricochet Shot to be able to remove our minions, but again, Divine Shield can go a long way to be able to prevent those removals, so Hunter actually felt like a really good matchup for this deck. Mage, 4-0, and again, my eyes directly to On the Coin, 3-0. All 4 of these mages were the Rainbow Spell School Mage, and again, it just felt like the minions, I was able to run over my opponent. Divine Shield, Stealth, made it very challenging for my opponent to be able to remove the minions I was placing on the board, and then I just continued to magnetize those minions, make them bigger, and the opponents actually just weren't able to deal with them. Another favored matchup for the deck. Paladin, 1-0. Again, it's a board-based deck versus a board-based deck. Stealth and Divine Shield coming in handy and really just able to overpower. That matchup felt favored as well. 2-0 against Priest. I saw 1 Automaton Priest, which is likely a meme deck. Steamrolled that deck, of course. And then 1 Control Priest. That entire matchup, I was really just like biting my fingernails, hoping that they didn't play Shard of the Nauru. This deck, of course, because of the magnetizations and really just wanting to build very, very big minions on the board, extremely vulnerable to silence. Shard of the Nauru, I think, would single-handedly make this matchup unfavored. I would not necessarily expect to be able to win that control matchup against Control Priest. But I will say, in 28 games, I faced not one single silence, and likely important to note that if this deck continues to grow in popularity, people may start running like a Smothering Starfish. Mech Rogue, of course, really popular on the ladder. It was my most popular matchup. I faced it 8 times, coming in at a grand total of 3 and 5. No, I'm not bad at the mirror match. What you're going to notice is that this match is based almost totally on who goes first. You really want to go first with the deck. It's a huge advantage, and the person going second is likely just going to be behind all game. Their minions are going to be removed all game, and they are actually going to lose. So you can see here, I lost all 4 times I was on the coin. The one game that I lost when I was on the play, my opponent was just making an insanely powerful turn 3 play. I was so far behind that there was just nothing I could do at that point. But typically with this matchup, the only thing that's really going to matter is whether you're going first or going second. So really not a very fun mirror match. You're actually just flipping coins to see who goes first in that matchup, in my experience. 1-1 against Shaman here. Again, you can see the one loss that I had was on the coin. Going first, just so good with this deck. I think if you're going first, the matchup is favored. And even if you're going second, this particular matchup may not be that bad. I was playing against Nature Shaman, OTK Shaman, however you want to call it. They do have some removal, but in certain situations, they're not going to be able to get to your stealth minions. Their AoE just doesn't hit hard enough. Divine Shield goes a long way. So again, Divine Shield Stealth, definitely our friend in this matchup. Been able to get minions on the board so that they stick and continue to grow them with the magnetizations that we have up and down the deck here. Warlock 4-0. The thing that I learned about this matchup is that Warlock just gets completely destroyed by this deck. In the early game, they have a really hard time removing all of our minions. Our minions continue to get bigger. And even if they're able to play like a Forge of Wills on 3 and the Imposing Anubisath on 4 for the big boy 7/7 rush, oftentimes it's too late. We've been able to give our minions, Wind Fury or Divine Shield through scrap bots. The minion is already able to remove a 7/7. And their own 7/7 actually isn't enough to remove our stuff just because it's not big enough by that point of the game. And of course, if they don't have Forge of Wills exactly along with the Anubisath, then really they're just struggling to do anything whatsoever in the matchup. Warlock, you absolutely just steamroll this matchup. And then you can see here, Warrior, I actually did not face, so really no insight for that. Mulligan for the deck is going to be the same in every single one of these matchups. We're going to look to keep our 1-drops, Click Clocker, Drone Deconstructor, as well as the Frequency Oscillator. And then you're also going to want to keep from the scrap heap to be able to get those scrap bots in your hand early so that you can develop a plan of how you're going to be able to get those minions on the board. One thing I would say is please keep to the standard mulligan of 1-drops and from the scrap heap. Don't allow yourself to be convinced into keeping like a prep Bone Spike to try to cheat something out. You're going to run out of cards, have nothing in your hand, and if you get answered, then you just have no way to be able to repopulate the board. Also, you don't want to be keeping the 3-drop magnetized cards. Again, even if your plan is to play Oscillator on 1 and then magnetize to it on turn 2 because of the discount, it really just doesn't play out all that well in the real world. So please do yourself a favor, stick to the standard mulligan, 1-drops, and from the scrap heap. So I also wanted to show the way that I go about playing this deck. This is actually the game that I hit Legend on, so spoiler alert, I do win this game, but I wanted to talk through some things, kind of my philosophy of playing the game here. You can see here, I don't have 1-drops, I don't have from the scrap heap, so I'm going to toss all this. I don't want to trick myself into doing something silly and keeping the wrong cards here. And then you can see I do have a from the scrap heap, I also have a prep, but don't really have a turn 1 play. And we're going to be up against like a rainbow mage here. You can see they have a pretty good turn 1 play. They just go ahead and drop their 1-drop. They're going to be gaining some health. Picking up the Frequency Oscillator. I just dropped that down on the board. I don't necessarily care that my opponent can value trade. I don't care that they can just ping it off. I just want to get a minion out on the board, and I want to be able to get that discount that can be banked for later turns. Again, it's not just this turn only. It's the next mech you play at any point in the game. So important to keep that in mind with the Frequency Oscillator. And you can see they choose to value trade, so our opponent here actually has a pretty good start. They have 2 minions on the board, they have an Arcane Bolt to be able to deal damage and remove things. So already I'm thinking, how am I going to get minions to stick on the board? Because that's the only way we're going to win with this deck. We need minions still alive after our opponent's turn so that we can magnetize and make them bigger here. And so at this point I'm thinking about just prepping out from the scrap heap. Not a lot of spells in the deck, and I'm going to do that. And then you're going to see that I actually go through and check to see what I got. Poisonous, Reborn, and Rush. Depending on the keywords that you get on those scrap bots, it could potentially change what you want to do in the following turns. Did I hit Stealth? Did I hit Divine Shield? Did I hit Wind Fury? You want to start planning ahead about the best way to be able to utilize those keywords as the game moves forward here. And then at this point, I'm deciding, do I want a Hero Power or do I want to Forge the Lab Constructor? Again, with scrap bots in hand, you don't have to forge that Lab Constructor. You could actually just play it and then attach a scrap bot to it to make it a little bit bigger as those minions begin to duplicate here. So you can see that I took my time thinking about this. I check over my keywords again, trying to decide what to do. Ultimately, I decided to dagger up and trade for the Arcane Artificer, kind of shut down some of the mage's ability to be able to gain armor and to, you know, quote unquote, heal as we're looking here. And then we can see again a pretty standard, they do float 1 mana, but they do get down the weapon. So again, I'm thinking my opponent is going to be playing, you know, potentially on turn 4 like a Cold Case. They're going to gain armor, they're going to put, you know, the skeletons in play, as well as having the 4/4 coming into play here. So at this point, I'm looking at my hand and I'm trying to decide what's the best way to be able to get a minion to stick on the board, and you know, in what way am I really going to be able to make that happen the best. And I'm also thinking about what my opponent can do to be able to remove minions. So the particular mage, they have not forged anything, so I don't have to worry about the forged 3 mana spell that deals 3 damage twice. Of course, that would be 6. And so I'm really approaching this turn wanting to, I decide to go ahead and forge here, as you can see. And then I think I do play the Frequency Oscillator. It's like a free card. It's going to discount the next card. And again, I just pass. You know, no reason to not go ahead and play this. Maybe my opponent gets confused and spends 2 mana to ping the 2/1. You know, that could happen. And it actually does. It's almost like a waste of mana. I assume my opponent didn't have a better play here. And then with the Click Clocker top deck, I'm really just wanting to go in here. So I'm thinking I drop the Click Clocker. It's got Divine Shield. I then attach the Lab Constructor to it. I have a Divine Shield minion that's going to duplicate. And then you're going to see me look over my keywords again. There is a Reborn scrap bot here. And being able to give that minion Divine Shield and Reborn, and it duplicates at the end of the turn. This is insanely powerful. And at this point, I know that there's nothing my opponent can do to remove both of these minions. It's just not possible based on the cards that we expect to be in their deck. And if our opponent can't remove both of these minions, we just win on the spot. And it's like that in so many matchups. They have 1 turn to be able to remove these minions that duplicate. If they can't do it, they ain't winning. And that's going to take us directly to the winner's circle. And you can see here my opponent is considering his options. He actually spends 5 mana to draw 2 cards. And he takes a trade here. And I believe we're actually going to see the concede coming out from our opponent. I was going to play the Any Storm Coil for another copy and just continue to replicate throughout the board here. And you can see we actually win. And then we're going to see that I come into Legend at a kind of a modest rank here, I think. But the climb, very, very easy with this deck. And getting back to that original question, I would have to say, is Mech Rogue a Tier 1 deck? Absolutely yes. My experience in climbing to Legend is that this deck is insanely powerful, and it is absolutely a Tier 1 deck. If you've enjoyed the video, please consider the like button and the subscribe button. I'm Uncorrupt. Thank you for watching.